So I'm looking right now at the patch notes for the Warriors of the Sky update, which was the update that we got in January 2020 this year. And you might be wondering why I'm looking at this. I'm looking at it because this is the first update that introduced the awakening skills, or the awakened skills rather. And they introduced it through the Warriors of the Sky right here. And I was actually really interested in this idea when they first pitched it. Now, granted, it's not exactly clear what awakened skills are through the patch notes here, but from what I read, they seemed like a really interesting direction to take characters in. Now, you can see here that from the very beginning of the update, they made clear that in order to awaken characters, to have an awakening skill, you would need to build up other characters as well. And once you have those characters built up, you would be given access to this awakened potential screen. You'd be given a new skill, and the skill would look a little something like this in the GIF that you see here. And I thought this was really cool because something that you would notice here is that all four of the Warriors of the Sky are available in the awakening skill. So I thought that this was a really interesting direction to take the characters of the game in, because it would encourage players to build other characters, and it would encourage players to explore team dynamics so much more, right? Well, that hasn't exactly been the way that it panned out. I don't know if it was ever the way that the Marvel Future Fight devs wanted the game to pan out. Actually, after having seen these patch notes, I was envisioning that they might introduce groups of awakening skills for other groups in the game, such as the Inhumans, maybe an awakening skill for the Fantastic Four, or Asgardians or something like that. And now that we're about 9 months or so past this update, we have a clearer picture of what awakening skills are meant to be. And I have to say I was a little disappointed with how awakening skills ended up being. I had a crazy idea where these characters that you had to build up in order to unlock the awakening conditions would influence the power of the skill that you had, as if you were using your own characters in other characters' skills. I don't know, I thought that would have been a really cool idea for them to do, but they didn't do that, right? So now you might still be asking, why am I looking at these patch notes? Why am I looking at this aspect of the game? I'm looking at this because I want to explore what awakened characters are meant to be in the game. I think there's no better place to start exploring than from the beginning, when they're first introduced. When I look at this update, it leads me to believe that the Netmarble devs never really knew what awakened characters were meant to be. And in the end, I think that's harmful for the game and severely limits what directions characters can go in. Now, I'm not saying that awakened characters are bad. There's very clear examples of very good awakened characters in the game, such as Mystique, Beta Ray Bill. No, the argument is not that they're bad. The argument is that they limit the design space for the developers to explore in future updates. They completely sabotage the hierarchy of Marvel Future Fight's power system, and that awakening skills are ultimately pointless in the game. Now, hear me out before you raise your pitchforks about the things that I'm saying. I know there's so many people that love awakened skills. I've wanted to explore this topic in a video for a long time, and I've wanted to voice out my ideas just to put my hat into the conversation. Now, the point I made about awakened characters limiting design space was only recently fixed into my head by the latest update, which introduced the Transcend Potential system. This Transcend Potential system was the devs' way of bridging the gap between awakened characters and tier 3 characters. It buffed their stats and in a small way lowered the effect of their awakened skills in order to bring a little bit more balance into the game between the awakened characters and tier 3 characters. The reason I think this limits the design space for a lot of characters is because any character that gets their potential transcended at this point is basically a character that will never ever get tier 3. And a lot of these characters are very beloved characters among Marvel fans. We're looking at characters like Beta Ray Bill, Dr. Octopus, Mystique, Characters like those, you might argue, deserve tier 3s, given their iconic status among Marvel lore. And it might be disappointing for fans of theirs that they'll never get a tier 3 at this point. Now granted, at any moment, Marvel Future Fight could decide to introduce a character that has both an Awakened skill and a tier 3 skill. But given that they moved the position of the Awakened skill to the position of the tier 3 skill for other characters, I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. This kind of accelerates Marvel Future Fight's power creep as well, because when tier 3s were announced, it seemed like the end game for tier 3s would be to have all characters have a tier 3 skill. And even now, we're still a very long way off of that. But with Awakened characters becoming part of the picture, we're basically seeing the rate of characters who have either an Awakened skill or a tier 3 skill double. Instead of just one, we get 2 every update. Given that it's doubled, we're fast approaching a time where all characters will have either their potentials transcended or a tier 3 skill. Now I know we're still a very long way off of that, but it makes Marvel Future Fight have to answer the question faster of what do they do after all characters have this? It feels really pointless to have to rush through that, especially given that there's so many characters that they can explore with different types of tier 3s. It seems like tier 3s are a way for the devs to creatively convey a character's powers, their abilities, in fancy animations and beautiful looking skills. And I'm not saying Awakened character skills are not beautiful or anything like that. They just seem rather bland compared to the tier 3 skills. On a small tangent, I'd like to say how ridiculous it is that all Awakened characters' skills have characters that come in and attack for them, but these characters are basically meaningless because they're not your own characters or anything like that. It's just a fancy gimmick that they have. Like I mentioned earlier, I think it would be really cool if the effect of the skill is amplified by how well built the other characters are. Imagine if on Beta Ray Bill's Awakened skill I could have my Thor with, I don't know, a CTP of Rage or something attack on the Awakening skill. Now that'd be really cool. But anyway, returning to topic, it really doesn't seem necessary for Marvel Future Fight to keep pushing for these Awakened characters. I don't know anyone who talks about their favorite character in the game and says, I can't wait for this character to get an Awakened skill or something. No, I'm pretty sure everyone wants their favorite characters to get tier 3s. And I think the game's just limiting themselves with what they can do by continuing to push this Awakened character's agenda. What if a character that has an Awakened skill ends up having a really popular comic line the next couple of years? Or what if an Awakened character ends up being the main character for an MCU movie later on? What'll they do then? At this point, every lead of an MCU movie has gotten a tier 3. What do they do when that happens? They wouldn't have to answer this question if Awakened characters weren't a thing, but now that they are, it's something that they have to consider. Now they have to plan out their updates with another obstacle in mind that they have to adjust to. This kind of factors into the other problem that I have with Awakened characters, which is that they mess with the power level scaling in the game right now. So let me explain. The way scaling works right now for most characters in the game is they start at tier 1, then they go to tier 2, and then they end up at tier 3. Now, granted, there are native tier 2s that end up at tier 2 from the very beginning, but that's beyond the point. The idea is that tier 3 was the end game for all characters. With Awakened characters, even those who ended at tier 2, there would always be that hope that they would eventually be able to reach the ceiling, which is tier 3. Now, with Awakened characters, the way power scales is different. They go from tier 1 to tier 2, and then to tier 3, or to transcended potential. And I think that way of power scaling makes it worse, because it presents major dilemmas in deciding whether or not to tier 3 or to awaken a character. Now let's look at the main differences between tier 3 and awakening characters. When you tier 3 a character, you invest 800 CCF, 1200 or 1600. Now, I am not aware of the cost to awaken a native tier 2 character because I haven't I haven't been able to awaken Beta Ray Bill yet for me, but I'm sure it is less than the cost to tier 3 a similar type of character. For most characters, to awaken them would cost 240 CCF, right? So, in that sense, awakened characters are forever cheaper than tier 3 characters. And this poses a few problems, right? For the most part, awakened characters will be weaker than their tier 3 counterparts, which means that awakened characters will permanently be below tier 3 characters in the game. They will forever be on a lower power level, and they will forever be limited with the amount of content that they can do in comparison to their tier 3 counterparts. This is for most characters. However, there are some tier 3 characters that are weaker than awakened characters. If you compare Black Panther and Mystique, for example, it's no question who is stronger. This poses another dilemma. Why is a stronger character far cheaper to build than a counterpart of theirs? It kind of messes with the system and makes it confusing for players to understand what value their materials have and how value works in the game. This would be a different story if transcended potential for characters wasn't the end game and they could still reach tier 3. But given how this new update has shaped out so far, it doesn't appear that that's going to be the case. By putting transcended potential and tier 3 on the same level, Marvel Future Fight has essentially pitted these two endgames against each other. And now, at the back of players' heads, there's always going to be the question of whether or not a tier 3 would be better or an awakened character would be better. Because essentially, these characters serve the same function. They have amplified stats, they have a skill that does a massive amount of damage, which can be activated after a certain amount of time. With awakened characters, it's a fixed 30 seconds on max cooldown, and with tier 3 characters, it depends on their skill rotation, right? So these characters essentially serve the same function, which begs the question of why one of them is so much cheaper to build than the other. It completely negates the consistency of the power scaling system, and I just don't think it's a good look for the game. This kind of touches on the other problem that I have with awakened characters, which is that their skills are ultimately pointless. When they were first introduced in the Warriors of the Sky update, we were promised something new, something that would build on the team dynamics between characters, which is why I presume they were introduced with this team of characters, the Warriors of the Sky. We were promised something different, a skill with maybe a little less impact than a tier 3 skill, but something more accessible to most characters because it would be activated through highlighting their strengths as a team. And I think just how Marvel Future Fight as a game has moved away from that initial idea is kind of evident in the amount of awakened characters that we're getting. That Warriors of the Sky January update gave us 4 awakened characters. The next update, which was the Hydra Supreme update, gave us 2 awakened characters, Doc Ock and Red Skull. The succeeding updates all gave us 1. Just 1. And I think at that point, it really became clear that the whole team dynamic thing was kind of being ditched. And so they decided to make awakening skills more like tier 3 skills. Or tier 3 stat buffs rather, with the whole transcend potential system. Which begs the question again of what's the difference supposed to be with tier 3 characters? These skills are basically tier 3 skills at this point, and they really don't serve a purpose that tier 3 skills can't provide for players anymore. And the fact that they're so similar at this point, I think ties into the problem that I had with the whole difference between tier 3s and awakened characters being a thing in the game nowadays. So after all these arguments that I have, the question still remains of what the point of awakened characters are. And I think it's pretty clear to me at this point that the point of awakened characters is basically money. Awakened characters came with a couple of new materials necessary in order to bring these characters to their awakened states. At first, it was just awakening crystals, but then Mandalay gem fragments were introduced afterwards. And after 9 months of update after update introducing awakened characters, Given that they don't serve any function that tier 3s don't serve already, I'm kinda led to believe that this is just a way for Netmarble to be able to sell more materials. And some of you might say that that's pretty obvious given how greedy a reputation Netmarble Monster have right now, but I was willing to give them the benefit of the doubt in this case. I was kind of hoping they would introduce something cool, something different with the Awakened character system. But given how they've moved away from the initial pitch that they made with the Awakened characters, I'm kind of leaning toward the more pessimistic side now. I do hope that this Transcend Potential system isn't the end of their adjustments to the Awakened characters. I feel like they're still not satisfied with how Awakened characters are in the game, and I think that's a good thing, because right now they really don't serve any purpose in this game. There's a reason I only have one Awakened character. It'll be two by the time I get Beta Ray Bill's potential, but I digress. Right now, they don't do anything that tier 3 characters can't do, which means that they essentially don't have a role in this game. And I really hope that one day they'll be able to serve a unique function in the game in a creative and really interesting manner. So those are just my thoughts on Awakened characters. They've been thoughts that I've had for a while now. I don't know if it's the popular opinion. I actually think it's rather unpopular. So if anyone out there disagrees, feel free to let me know in the comments. I know that I'm kind of in the minority here, but I just wanted to share my thoughts. So I hope that this video has been insightful for those of you watching. And as always, thank you so much for watching.